Hello, welcome to No Drop. I'm Jeff Zen. This is episode 2 of Big Ride Series. Big Ride Series tells the story of my most ambitious rides, each one sparked by curiosity and a passion for exploration. On this episode, I'll be talking about the Burning Elmo. The Burning Elmo is a 190-mile, 21,000-foot ride through the mountains of Angeles Forest. And for those that ride in metric, that is 305 kilometers and 6,400 meters of climbing. This is one of the hardest rides I've ever done. And I'm really looking forward to talking about the route and also really diving into the lessons I learned along the way. Because things that are very challenging, things that are very hard in my experience, are the opportunities to learn the most. And believe me, this ride taught me a ton. Leading up to this ride, I had done bigger rides. I had never done this much climbing in a ride. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of where my fitness was at when I set out to do this route. This ride actually took place in May of 2020, and I was starting to get pretty experienced with big rides, rides that are kind of around that 200-mile benchmark. When I attempted this, I had already done the biggest ride I've ever done, which is my 400-mile ride from San Jose to Los Angeles. I had done a ride that was 16,000 feet of climbing in 150 miles. And I had also done a handful of rides that were over that 200-mile mark. So no stranger to big rides at this point, but still, I gotta call this very early days. My first double century was in 2018. So at this point, we're really kind of only talking about 18 to 24 months of experience doing rides like this. This ride also took place right when COVID was happening. In the months leading up to this effort, I was doing a ton of indoor training. I was doing lots of weightlifting. I was doing centuries in Zwift. Training was actually really, really great leading into this effort. I was carrying a very, very high amount of fitness, but they were all indoor trainer miles. And so as I talk about the route, we'll kind of talk about how that trainer fitness translated into a real world outdoor experience. By the way, if you want to follow along with this route, I'm actually going to link it down in the podcast notes. So you can click there, you can see the actual Strava activity. Also, if you're finding this podcast helpful, something else you'll find in the podcast notes is a link to a Venmo and a PayPal. If you would like to support future episodes, you can donate there. Going back to May of 2020, that's when this ride actually happened. And this was not my first attempt at this route. This route was actually conceived of probably a year, maybe a year and a half before this attempt. And it really came out of a desire to connect the Mount Baldy Ski Lifts to the top of Mount Gleason. If you're familiar with Angeles Forest, either of these climbs would be a ride that people would really think was impressive. So doing the Mount Baldy Ski Lifts, amazing ride. Doing Mount Gleason on its own, also an amazing ride. But I really started to play with the idea of how can I link these two climbs together? And the route that I made starts going up the Mount Baldy Ski Lifts, actually comes back over up Highway 39 to Islip Saddle, up and over Cloudburst Summit, and then you descend down to the base of Mount Gleason, and then you go up to the top of Mount Gleason at the end. When I came up with this ride, I knew it was going to be a huge challenge. never before had I combined this much climbing with this much distance. So this was a very, very steep ride. You know, we're doing 21,000 feet in 190 miles. If we cut out the commuting, if you're looking at the route, you'll see that there's a lot of flat commuting miles, especially to get out to the base of GMR going up to GRR. If we cut those flat miles out, we're probably looking at a ride that's more like 150, 160 miles with 21,000 feet. So that is starting to get very steep. You know, 135, 140 feet per mile is a grueling gradient to deal with. I was excited to go on this adventure. Like I said, there was a lot of fitness going into this, so I was really excited. For the actual attempt, I did this ride with my buddy Connor Hughes, very commonly known as SpongeBob. SpongeBob is an incredible cyclist, one of my favorite people to ride with because our riding styles are so similar. But this is pretty early on in not only my big riding experience, but also in Connor's. If I remember correctly, at the time, this would be by far the biggest ride that he had ever done. So I was really excited to take on this challenge with him, kind of thinking going into it that, you know, I might be the one to sort of teach him some things along the way. As I talk about the route, we'll really kind of see how Connor was the one who led me through this, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So let's wind back and talk about the start of this ride and just how the route went. The day before doing this ride, I remember being very, very excited because with COVID training and with all that time being inside, you know, I was somebody who was kind of used to spending maybe 14 to 16 hours outside riding my bike every single week. And while the indoor training was fun and it was an interesting and new experience to jump on Zoom with my friends and hang out all day and do these crazy rides in Zwift, I was really looking forward to getting outside. Connor and I left at 2:30 in the morning to start this ride. We had a lot of miles ahead of us, so we thought starting early would be the way to go. That definitely worked out. One thing I remember about the beginning of this ride is that when we got on to GMR and were climbing up to Mount Baldy, we had the light of the full moon. And I am such a fan of riding under the full moon. I remember going up GMR, going up GRR, and having that light of the moon over our left shoulder, over the mountains of Angeles Forest. That full moon was illuminating enough of the road so if we wanted, we could turn off our headlights, we could turn them down to minimal power and still feel safe. And so that was a really special and amazing way to, for the first time in months, get outside into the mountains and start having an adventure. We rode the light of the full moon all the way up to the top of the Mount Baldy Ski Lifts. At that point, we finished the first big climb, and so we start dropping down. And we head over to East Fork, which is just off GRR, and we took East Fork over to Highway 39. At this point, we're at about mile 85 of a 190-mile ride. And this is where the ride started to get really, really interesting. Turning on to Highway 39, I did not know this, but I was about to learn some very memorable lessons going up to Highway 2. And so we're climbing up Highway 39. The sun has come out at this point. And the first thing that I'm starting to realize is that Highway 39 is very, very exposed in terms of if the sun is out, it is going to be just beating down on you. And so I'm out there. I haven't been outside in weeks or months potentially, and I am starting to cook. And this is the first lesson that I learned on this ride. And this is maybe the biggest lesson I learned on this ride. And that lesson is fitness is not enough. You also have to be ready for the elements. And so let's rewind for a second and look back at that COVID training, the training that was happening indoors on the trainer. That training was happening in air conditioning. It was happening with multiple fans pointing on me at all times. I was able to jump off my bike and get cold water anytime I felt like it. All of those things, even though I was riding lots of hours and I was riding very hard and I was riding in a structured way that was building fitness, my body was not used to dealing with the outdoors. And so as I'm going up the 39, we're at mile 85, like I said. And this ride is basically over for me. I am completely melted just a few miles up Highway 39. Highway 39 is a very long climb. From the bottom to the top is one of the longest climbs, continuous climbs in North America. So this is no joke. And I am very early on in this climb and also in the ride, and I am already cooked. I really can't remember a time where I've been in a more negative place than the ride going forward from here. So literally the next 100 miles that I'm going to talk about, I am absolutely in a pain cave and I am completely bonked, and I don't know how I continued to push my legs, but I continued to go up the mountain. And so the first lesson I'm learning here is, okay, wow, this outdoor thing with the sun on you, with the heat, this is a different animal. I'm really not ready for this. It didn't take long to learn lesson number 2, because that also happened going up Highway 39. And that lesson was, as we're going up the 39, I was carrying a hydration pack. That gave me the sense that I could skip certain things. Up Highway 39, there is a little market just a few miles off the main road. It's a little bit of a detour, and we decided to skip that market. And that is the second lesson, is that when you're on a big ride, when I do big rides like this, now we're here in 2025, when I do these rides, I stop more than I need to and take advantage of all of the support that you might find in whatever area you're riding through. This was a huge mistake to skip the market. At the market, I could have had a soda, I could have had candy, I could have just gotten off of my bike for a while and just sat, maybe even laid on the ground, put my legs up, sort of let my body calm down, let my heart rate drop a little bit. We did not do that, and that was a huge mistake. So now, when I do these big rides, and ever since this ride, I try to take advantage of whatever an area might give, even if it seems silly to stop, twice in 50 miles or something like that. If the support is there, I'm a big, big fan of taking it. So we're continuing past the Crystal Lake Cafe. We're continuing up Highway 39, and we're almost to Highway 2 at this point. So now we're talking about around a mile 100 or so. Going up to Islip Saddle and connecting to Highway 2, there was a point that Connor got off his bike because he had found some snow, and that snow was melting into water. And so there is this ice cold water, and Connor is splashing the water on himself. He's putting snow in his jersey. Connor did an amazing job on this ride, and this was one of the times where I really, really saw the contrast between the place that I was and he was. He was being playful, he was being positive, He was taking an opportunity to cool down. Now, this is the third lesson for me, is that looking back, I see what a negative place I was in on this ride for most of the ride. But in this moment, I feel like it's particularly apparent that my mood is making me a worse cyclist. So I was in a place where I couldn't get off the bike. I couldn't stop that progress. I was in such a negative place that the only freedom that I saw was to just keep pedaling and keep pushing. Somehow that would get the ride over faster. Now that I have grown a lot in my cycling, I see that that is actually a really negative place to be. Had I been able to, like Connor could, be a little more patient, be a little more playful, be more positive in that moment, I would have seen the wisdom of, hey Jeff, you've been overheating for 90 minutes. Maybe stopping and splashing some cold water on you would be a good idea. In hindsight, it seems really simple, and it seems really ridiculous that I couldn't see it in the moment. But that is the power of the mind, and that is the power of negativity. And so that is the third lesson that I learned, is that I really try to watch out for negative moods. And if I feel them coming up, if I sense them coming up mentally, I will do my best to adjust them and to let them flow through me and flow out of me. Because being able to stay positive, or at least neutral, can really help make better decisions in the moment. Finally, we've reached Highway 2. And from Highway 2, we actually climb up to the tallest point of the climb, which is Cloudburst Summit. And then we take that down over to Upper Big Tahunga, and we take a right on Upper Big Tahunga, take that over to Angeles Forest Highway, and now we're turning right to continue going north to the base of Mount Gleason, where we're going to finish off the ride. As we were going up to the base of Mount Gleason, we decided to skip this little area called Mill Creek. Mill Creek is like a little fire station. This is where I'm seeing the fourth lesson from this ride. Earlier, I had mentioned that I decided to take a hydration pack on this ride. Where I was at in my riding, I was starting to use the hydration pack more and more. And it was giving me this sense of, oh, if I just wear this, I don't ever have to stop for anything. It was giving me this false sense of being invincible. On this ride, we had ample water stops along the way. I did not really need a hydration pack to do this ride. So the lesson I learned from this was that now I only take hydration packs when they are necessary, when they're required. But if I'm on a ride where there is water along the way, even if it means that I have to stop for a few minutes in order to refill, or even if I have to detour slightly off the trail that I'm on, I will do that. It is faster. If you take that weight and you multiply it by the amount of climbing you're doing, multiply it by the amount of distance that you're riding, the hydration pack is definitely a net negative on a ride where you have options to get water. They do add weight and they do slow you down. After we pass Mill Creek and make our way up to the top of Mount Gleason, at this point, the ride is basically over. This is about mile 150. So we do have about 40 miles to get out of the mountains and then to get back down into Pasadena to drop Connor off. This was such a hard day for me. I'm really proud of myself for making it through. But more than that, I'm really proud that Connor did so well. I mean, this is his biggest route. And here we're going into it and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to get Connor through this. It was very, very much the opposite. His positivity, his ability to handle the ride really made it so that I could be successful. So even though on paper I was the more experienced rider, he did so much better than me, and in a lot of ways got me through the ride. This ride was the biggest ride I had ever done for a while after this. So this was a huge, huge accomplishment. And the final metrics were 191 miles, 21,639 feet of climbing. We did it in a moving time of 15 hours, 50 minutes, and a total time of 18 hours and 29 minutes. Oh my gosh, that is such a long day on the bike. And I just real quick, before I finish up this episode, I do want to just recap the lessons that I learned, because this is a very important ride. As far as my riding history goes, this ride gave me so much input and taught me so many lessons that I still carry to this day. And so lesson number one, and this is the biggest lesson, fitness isn't enough. You must also be ready for the elements. So you got to be ready to ride outdoors and whatever that brings. Lesson number two, skipping cafes or skipping markets is always a mistake. Just take the break, take the rest. It really helps out. Lesson number three, watch out for negative moods. Your mental game being strong is really, really important. So whatever that means, stop more often, take it easy, don't be afraid to slow down, don't be afraid to cool off, sit in the shade. Whatever keeps you positive is a huge, huge plus. And lesson number four is that hydration packs don't make you invincible. So if I'm on a route where there's tons of water stops, I don't even bother taking a hydration pack anymore. It is almost always going to be faster to ride without the hydration pack. That is the Burning Elmo. This is not a route that I recommend anybody do. It is very hard. It takes a huge amount of familiarity with Angeles Forest, with the surroundings, where the water is, where the food is. It's a really, really tough route, but check it out on Strava. And like I said, if you're finding this podcast helpful, you can support me. Jump into those podcast notes. There you'll find a link to a Venmo and a PayPal, and you can support future episodes. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, ride safe.